She fed him milk from a dropper and hid him from the neighbors. And when the old woman was finally taken to a psychiatric hospital, the creature was left alone and dried up within a week. What this woman brought from the forest near Kishtim would later be passed from hand to hand. The police, ufologists, some faceless people, until it disappeared forever. 4 long fingers, gray skin, a head shaped like an onion. And you know what's the scariest part of this story? No one ever studied it. Hi, my friend, you're watching Kurtop. I collect discoveries that official history prefers not to talk about. And today there will be 15 of them. 15 discoveries that simply shouldn't have existed. Sometimes, I believe there's a scientific explanation for everything, with nothing miraculous. But other times, even experts admit some things can't be explained. Then you'll choose what to believe for yourself. A dwarf or another type of human? Open any textbook and you'll see it states there's only one type of human on Earth, and we've always been the same. There is, of course, Darwin's theory that our ancestors were apes. Some people think we came from another planet, but I want to tell a more down-to-earth story. The island of Flores in Indonesia, Lingboa Cave, 2003 archaeologists who were looking for something completely different found the skeleton of an adult woman. She was just over a meter tall. Her brain was the size of a grapefruit, 3 times smaller than ours. At first, they thought it was a child or a large dwarf. But then, from the same layer, they found a second person just like her, then a third, and it became clear. It was an entire people of tiny humans. They made tools, built fires, and hunted. They were nicknamed hobbits. And here comes the most interesting part, which is why I started this channel. At first, they thought these dwarfs survived almost until our time. They lived just 12,000 years ago. It turns out we could have encountered them alive just yesterday, historically speaking. But in 2016, the cave was excavated again. They rechecked the age, and it turned out that the hobbits went extinct much earlier, 50,000 years ago, right around the time when our ancestors first arrived on the island. So we almost encountered them, and maybe that's exactly why they're no longer around. And their life was far from easy. On that same island, there were dwarf elephants that they hunted, and a 3-meter-long monitor lizard, that very same Komodo dragon which still lives there to this day. And it attacks people when it gets the chance. Just imagine a person the size of a 5-year-old child. Who goes up against a lizard with a stone spear, a lizard as long as a car? And yet somehow they managed to survive for thousands of years. And let me tell you, without any fairy tales, these weren't elves or aliens. This is a real human species, recognized by science and named Homo floresiensis. Scientists only argue about why it became so small. Some believe the island is responsible. With scarce food and no predators, animals shrink over thousands of years. That's why even the elephants became dwarfs. But as you know, it's not about height. We weren't alone. Homo floresiensis, a different kind of people, lived alongside us. And apparently we had a lot more neighbors like that than we were told in school. A hermit who became a separate species. Since we figured out that we're only alone in the textbooks, let's go to Altai, to the Denisova cave. In one of the layers of earth there, in 2008, they found a tiny bone fragment, just a finger phalanx the size of a bean. Finds like that are usually not even looked at twice. But this one was sent for DNA analysis. And in 2010, they decoded the genome. The geneticists were shocked. It was neither a human in the usual sense nor a Neanderthal. It was a completely unknown species of human to science. Until that moment, no one had even heard of it. An entire species of humanity was identified from a single fragment of a finger belonging to a girl about 6 or 7 years old. They were named Denisovans after the cave. Later, they found just a couple of teeth and a fragment of a jaw, and that's all that exists from an entire species of intelligent beings. It's sad. All of it could fit in a matchbox. We still don't know what their faces looked like. Not a single complete skull, not a single skeleton. Just a vanished people with only DNA and 3 teeth left behind. And yet they lived across a vast territory, from Siberia to Southeast Asia, tens of thousands of years ago. And they met our ancestors so closely that many people today still have a piece of Denisovan in their blood, for example, among the people of Tibet. It is their ancient gene that helps people breathe at those altitudes where others suffocate. Just think about how much everything was simplified for us back in school when they drew that neat little ladder. a monkey, then a hunched ancestor, and then suddenly, us. In reality, it wasn't a ladder, but an overgrown dark forest, where several different types of humans wandered at the same time. They slept in the same caves and had children together. And to this day, we still don't know how many more types of humans we might find in the future. Maybe even alive. I can't speak for others, but I'd love to meet those ancient people. It's sad we don't get that chance. People make money off them. Peru, Paracas Peninsula, where in 1928 an archaeologist excavated an ancient cemetery and took skulls from there. But the skulls were somehow unusual. They were elongated far back, long like a melon, with an unusually large volume. And they didn't find just one or two, they found more than 300. This is where what makes me both love and hate this topic begins, because there is an honest explanation, which I even kind of like. Many peoples around the world deliberately elongated the skulls of infants. The head of a newborn, while the bones are still soft, was simply wrapped with cloth and squeezed between boards. And in a couple of years, it would become elongated. This was a way to show noble origin. Like, I'm not just anybody. Royal blood runs in my veins. They did this in Peru, in Africa, and in France, up until the 19th century. And the brain itself didn't change, only the shape of the skull. And there's another explanation that people make good money on. Videos are going viral on the internet where people seriously tell you that they supposedly found unknown, non-human DNA in these skulls, that it's an alien hybrid. And here's what annoys me. Under every such video, there's always a promotional link urging you to buy a book, support the research, or fund the next expedition. Ancient customs have been turned into a way to make money off naive viewers. I believe there's no alien DNA there at all. None of those sensational analyses have ever been repeated or confirmed by any independent geneticist. And the skull deformation has long been explained. Especially nowadays, people change their appearance beyond recognition themselves. They lengthen their necks, get implants, inject oils under their skin, and enlarge their lips. So we ourselves have no idea what we'll look like in the near future. But I'll finish the story about the skulls with something interesting. A couple of specimens from Paracas still stand out from the rest. Head binding changes the shape of the skull, but it shouldn't change the volume and weight of the bone itself. There, you can find skulls larger and heavier than usual, and science still lacks a clear explanation for this. Dinosaurs that never existed. Mexico, the town of Acámbaro, where in 1944 a German merchant was riding on horseback. He noticed a piece of pottery in the ground and started digging. Over several years, he unearthed more than 30,000 clay figurines. Among them were people, gods, animals, and even dinosaurs. And not just generic lizards, but quite recognizable ones, with crests and plates on their backs. On some figurines, there's even a person next to the dinosaur, as if they lived at the same time. Fans of alternative history, of course, are delighted. Here is proof, they say, that humans lived side by side with dinosaurs, which means all of geology is lying, and the Earth isn't millions of years old at all. Unfortunately, most likely this is a 20th century forgery. Local peasants were paid for every figurine they brought. At that time, dinosaur movies were popular locally, and magazines with pictures were selling. So the idea's origin is obvious, no further explanation needed. But I'll still tell you why this story doesn't let me go completely. When the figurines were sent for analysis to determine how long ago the clay was last fired, the laboratory gave the result, thousands of years ago. It smelled like a sensation. Even a respected American professor publicly vouched for the authenticity of the finds, and he basically ruined his entire career over it. But then the laboratory suddenly retracted its result. They said they made a mistake in the calculations. Who pushed them to do this and why so quickly is still unclear. And this, in my opinion, is the very reason why you might be watching this channel. It's not about dinosaurs with humans. I don't believe in that. It's about something else. When the result is convenient, all the scientists and historians talk about it right away and turn it into a sensation. But when it's inconvenient, they quietly hide it as if it never happened. That's what annoys me. He lied twice. And again, Peru, because this land seems to be made to drive archaeologists crazy. In the city of Ica, back in the 60s, there lived Dr. Javier Cabrera. One day, he came across a strange black stone with an engraving. and he became obsessed with this topic for the rest of his life, collecting a collection of more than 10,000 such stones. Scenes are carved on them that make you uneasy, if you know their age. People are looking at stars through a telescope, performing heart surgeries, transplanting organs, and yes, they're riding dinosaurs again. That's what they were called, the Ica stones. Official science quickly decided they were a hoax and even found the person who made them, a local farmer named Basilio Uchuya. At first he swore he found the stones in some secret tunnel, but when pressed, he confessed to everything and said he carved them himself. And to prove he wasn't lying, in 1977 he demonstrated everything on camera in the BBC documentary Paths to the Gods. Right during filming, he scratched a drawing using dental tools, and then he boiled the stone in manure to make it look ancient, just like that, and he sold it to gullible tourists. It seemed like the matter was closed. You could turn off the video and go watch the next one. But here comes my favorite twist in this story. After some time, Basilio took back his confession. He claimed that he lied about the forgery, and he lied on purpose so he wouldn't be jailed for looting real ancient graves, because you don't go to jail for making souvenirs, but you do get a long sentence for stealing antiquities. So now you're left wondering. The man confessed that he forged the stones, and then he confessed that he lied about the forgery. At this point, nobody knows what's true anymore, maybe not even him. Here's my opinion. A single peasant couldn't carve 10,000 stones by hand in a lifetime. It's unrealistic. The forgery must have been done on a large scale, possibly by an entire village. Or maybe some of the stones are actually real. Fragments of the stone army of Sardinia. It's a large island in the Mediterranean Sea west of Italy. In 1974, a local farmer was plowing a field in the area of Monte Prama. His plow hit something, and when the farmer looked closer, he realized he had pulled a human head carved from stone out of the ground. Archaeologists were called. They started digging, and they uncovered an entire stone army. Warriors with shields, archers, wrestlers, each one about 2 meters tall. They were made by an ancient people who lived on the island thousands of years ago. And they left behind thousands of stone towers, but not a single line of writing, so we don't really know who they were. The statues were not found whole. Someone deliberately broke them into pieces and buried them. Archaeologists collected about 40,000 fragments, and they put the figures back together like a huge stone puzzle. But what grabs your attention most are their faces. Instead of eyes, 2 circles are carved, one inside the other. It's like 2 targets are staring at you. The faces are flat, lifeless. Those who saw them for the first time said they looked more like robots than people, leading to an immediate theory that they weren't warriors at all, but aliens, whom the local people carved into stone from life. I don't believe in ancient robots. These statues were made by ordinary people, the ancient Nuragic people who lived in Sardinia and built those very stone towers. Everything was found and studied. And today the statues stand in a museum. But one mystery remains. These warriors weren't knocked down by time. Someone deliberately smashed them and buried them in the ground. And next to the statues, they also found human graves. And they were buried carefully in neat rows, one after another, according to their own custom, which means they were not savages. They were burned alive. Lovelock Cave, Nevada, USA. The Paiute Indian tribe passed down a terrifying legend from generation to generation. Supposedly, a hostile people once lived near them, red-haired giant cannibals, taller than any human. The Paiutes fought them for 3 years. In the end, they drove the remaining giants into a cave. They blocked the entrance with branches and brushwood, then set it on fire. Legend says that's how these people were burned alive. For years, it was thought to be just a frightening campfire story. Then, in 1911, 2 workers went into that cave. They were mining guano, bird droppings for fertilizer, and the deeper they went, the more they found. At first, just bones. Then they realized these were human skeletons, and there were more than 40 of them. Some of them were huge, 7, even 8 feet tall, over 2 meters. And near the entrance, they found traces of a strong fire. So, everything was exactly like in the legend about the Paiutes. The giants, the cave, and the fire. And then things got even stranger. They took more than 100,000 ancient items out of the cave, and among them, there were giant ones. For example, a sandal almost 40 centimeters long. That's for a person almost 3 meters tall. They also found clothes of that size, as if they were worn by giants, and many of the skeletons showed a reddish tint, both in the hair and on the skulls. A descendant of the Paiute chief, a woman named Sarah Winnemucca, even kept a lock of this red hair and sewed it into her dress, which she later wore when telling stories about the war with the giants. Many of those huge bones were simply lost over time. Some of the skulls were kept in the local museum, but about 10 years ago, they were removed and quietly buried. And the scientists who later examined the findings did not confirm the existence of giants. The bones belong to ordinary people. An ancient mummy's hair can turn red on its own because dark hair fades and turns red after thousands of years in the ground. But admit it, there are still doubts. How did a people who couldn't write have such a detailed history about a specific red-haired people, a 3-year war, the cave, and the fire? Why did they actually find fire traces near the entrance? The Paiutes still believe this isn't just a legend. They think it truly happened to their ancestors. Also, stories about red-haired giants are told beyond Nevada, too. They talk about them in Peru and New Zealand on Easter Island. I'm not quick to dismiss it all as fiction. And honestly, I don't understand why the very idea of giants seems so impossible to so many people. If there were once giant lizards, dinosaurs walking the earth, then why couldn't there have been large people too? In my opinion, that's a pretty reasonable assumption. An alien who turned out to be a child. Chile, the Atacama Desert, the driest place on the planet. Here, corpses don't rot, they dry out and lie for centuries. In 2003, a man named Oscar Munoz was wandering through an abandoned mining settlement and found a leather pouch. And inside, wrapped in cloth, was a tiny body only about 15 centimeters long, about the size of a human hand. And it looked so strange, you'd want to cross yourself. The head is elongated and pointed. The eye sockets are huge and set at an angle. The teeth are like those of an adult, and there are 10 pairs of ribs instead of the usual 12. They called it Ata. And honestly, just look at it. 9 out of 10 people would say it's an alien. In 2013, a film about UFOs called Sirius was released where the American Stephen Greer announced to the whole world that this was a mummy. And there is evidence of aliens. The video spread all over the planet. But it was this very film that led to the solution. Gary Nolan, a Stanford professor, watched it and chose to investigate. He says he didn't go to debunk anything. In fact, he admits he eventually got excited himself. What if it really was an alien? He took a sample from the rib and decoded all the DNA. And in reality, it's a human, a girl, most likely from Chile. And all the frightening appearance is just mutations. They found 64 mutations in her genes that have never been seen in humans before. And they were located exactly in the genes responsible for bone growth and the number of ribs. Because of them, the bones aged prematurely. And by those signs, it seemed like the child was about 6 or 7 years old, although in reality this is a premature infant. And the mummy itself is only about 40 years old. That means she is our contemporary. They don't know exactly why this child had so many DNA breaks right away, but there were abandoned mines nearby where saltpeter was extracted. Doctors believe the mother ingested these chemicals during pregnancy. As usual, some doubted this and accused Nolan of being bribed, claiming the whole team was silenced. He responded calmly, and in my opinion, brilliantly. The louder and more unbelievable the sensation, the more likely it is to be empty. That's exactly why it should be cleared away. Because when you clear away all that garbage, sometimes you find something underneath that truly turns science upside down. And do you know what that little Ata ended up doing? She proved that we still don't really know our own bodies. They found mutations in an ordinary human child that science didn't even know existed. It's not an alien. And still, it's an incredible discovery. Fear makes things look bigger than they are. The year is 1520, the far south of South America. Magellan's crew is settling in for the winter on an unfamiliar shore. One of the sailors, the scholar Antonio Pigafetta, who keeps a diary of the entire journey, describes an encounter that's hard to believe. A local resident is standing on the shore. He sings, dances, and tosses sand above his head, and he is so enormous that the tallest member of the crew only reaches his waist. Pigafetta writes exactly this: "This is not a man, this is a giant." And to establish contact, they send a sailor to him. they give him a mirror. And the giant, seeing himself for the first time, gets so scared that he faints. Then Magellan decides to capture a couple of these giants and bring them to Europe to show people, like a freak show. 2 of them were lured with gifts and put in shackles. But on the way home, both died. By the way, Magellan himself didn't make it back to Europe either. And he named this land Patagonia, which roughly translates as the land of big-footed people. That's where the legend started, which people in Europe believed for almost 300 years. And they took it seriously. Other sailors kept bringing back their own stories, but the height of the giants kept growing with each retelling. First it was 7 feet, then 9, and eventually even 12. On maps, those lands were marked as 9 and then even 12. On maps, those lands were described as the land of giants, as a warning to anyone who dared to go there. For 300 years, educated captains seriously swore that they had seen giants with their own eyes. But in reality, the people living there were the Tehuelche, who were about 6'3". For us, they were just big men. But a European of that time, due to constant malnutrition, was barely over 5 feet tall. So next to him, a Tehuelche looked like a real giant. And fear, along with sailors' tales, added another foot or so to the height of this tribe. The argument was settled by Charles Dark, who visited those lands himself and wrote that this was simply the tallest people he had ever seen. But still, they were people, not giants. And it seems like the topic could be closed. But one thought keeps bothering me. Legends about giants exist among every people on Earth, in every ancient culture. And surely not all of them can be made up. There must be something real behind it all. And you know, it's not just about height. The concealment of the truth is happening all over the world. And it doesn't just concern giants, but also the true age of entire civilizations, their knowledge and technologies, which for some reason we're not told about. So if you ever dig up something strange in your own yard, my advice to you is, don't be in a hurry to report it to the authorities. Mummies. 1932, San Pedro Mountains, Wyoming, USA. 2 prospectors, Cecil Mine and Frank Carr, are searching for gold. They blast through the rock, and behind it, a small sealed cave is revealed. Inside, on a stone ledge, sits a small figure with crossed legs, about 15 centimeters tall in a seated position. The face is not childlike at all. A flattened head, a mouth full of teeth, some of them sharp, dark, wrinkled skin like that of an old man. They called him Pedro, and immediately an old legend comes to mind. Among the Shoshone Indians, stories have been passed down from generation to generation about the little people called Nimerigar, tiny, evil little men who lived in these mountains, shot poisoned arrows, and finished off their sick and elderly with a blow to the head. And now in the cave sits a creature exactly the same height as in the legend, and with a fractured skull as well. In the 1940s and 1950s, the mummies were examined with X-rays, and scientists' opinions were divided. Some said it was an adult, while others believed it was an infant with a severe congenital defect, where the skull doesn't develop and the newborn looks like a little old man. Science eventually leaned toward this version. The child died immediately after birth, and the dry air of the cave dried and preserved the body. And it seemed like the debate was settled, but then comes the reason why the story isn't closed. The mummy was taken around fairs, passed from hand to hand. The last owner took it to Florida and died there, and Pedro disappeared without a trace along with his X-rays. It's no longer possible to examine him with modern methods. There's nothing left to examine. A reward of $10,000 was even offered for the find, but it was never found. However, in the 90s, a second similar mummy appeared, a smaller one, and it was nicknamed Chiquita. That one was properly studied. X-rays, DNA, dating. It turned out to be a baby girl of Native American descent with the same defect. She died several centuries ago, but her owners soon took her from the laboratory and hid her, and she disappeared as well. These mummies disappeared exactly when they could finally be properly studied, as if someone really didn't want the truth to be discovered. Alyoshenko or an alien? Imagine, Russia in 1996, the outskirts of the city of Kishtim, the village of Koalinovi. An elderly woman named Tamara Prosvirina, who had long been under psychiatric care, brings something alive home from the forest. It's small, about 20 to 25 centimeters. The head is elongated like an onion, with a crest. The eyes are huge, a small mouth without lips, 4 long fingers on each hand. The skin is grayish. The neighbors later said that it moved and squeaked quietly. Tamara called it Alyoshenka. She wrapped it in a scarf and fed it milk from a dropper, and a few weeks later she herself was taken to a psychiatric hospital. There was no one left to feed the creature, and it dried up and died right in the house. Then real Russian cinema begins. First, one of her acquaintances stole the body and dried it out. He wanted to sell it but didn't have time. He was caught stealing copper cable, and during a search the police accidentally found and took away Alyoshenka's mummy. For some time, it was kept in a safe as evidence. People saw it, photographed it, and filmed it on video. And this footage is still circulating on the internet. All of it is real. Then, ufologists became interested in the creature. They got the body for themselves under various pretexts. And then, it simply disappeared. The trail was lost forever. Alyoshenka never made it to a proper laboratory. And Tamara herself was hit by a car late one evening in 1999. And the only person who saw the creature alive was gone. Officially, science is convinced that it was a human fetus. A premature baby with severe developmental defects looks exactly like this: an elongated skull, huge eye sockets, and a developed little body. And the 4 fingers and gray skin are explained by drying out. It sounds logical and it's hard to argue with. But now I'll tell you something that usually isn't mentioned when this story is told. Kishtim is not just a remote town in the Urals. The Mayak plant is located very close by. And in 1957, a container with radioactive waste exploded there. It was one of the oldest nuclear accidents in history. Entire villages were exposed to radiation. People were quietly relocated, and the disaster itself was classified for decades. The world didn't learn about it for a long time, which raises a question. If a sick baby was really born in these parts, wasn't it the same radiation that made him that way? The land, water, and air here were all poisoned for years, and the authorities kept silent about it. I'm not saying Alyoshenka resulted from that accident. It's impossible to prove now since there's no body, but the place and time match too closely to dismiss as coincidence. And do you know what scares me most? But we probably can't even imagine how many more nuclear disasters have been kept hidden from us. Because in the race for nuclear weapons, secrecy has always been more important than people's safety. The US exposed its own population to radiation during tests. Britain covered up the accident and contamination in Windscale, but it was the Soviet Union that truly perfected the art of keeping silent. Given this, the disappearance of the little creature's body near Kishtim hardly seems like a coincidence. Bread from a corpse. In September 1991, 2 tourists were walking through the Alps on the border of Italy and Austria, and they noticed a human body in the melting glacier. At first, they thought it was some unlucky climber who had frozen there just recently, but it turned out that the person had been lying in the ice for more than 5,000 years. He was called Ötzi, after the Ötztal Alps. This was the Copper Age, deep antiquity, and yet the body was preserved as if he had died just recently. The skin, internal organs, even the contents of his stomach, and more than 60 tattoos. By the way, he didn't die from the cold. Later, an arrowhead was found in his shoulder. Ötzi was shot in the back and bled to death high in the mountains. Scientists have studied him for over 30 years. But recently, Austrian biologists decided to look where no one had looked before, inside his body, into the microbes. And there, they found an entire living world. There were also special cold-loving yeasts, fungi that slept for thousands of years in deep sub-zero temperatures, simply waiting for their time. In the laboratory, they began to slowly revive them. At first, the ancient yeast didn't understand at all what was expected of them. So the scientists spent months carefully getting them used to regular flour. And then the fungi seemed to wake up, and they started working exactly like modern baker's yeast. They made regular dough with this starter. It rose calmly in a day, and those who dared to try the bread first all say in unison that it turned out incredibly fluffy and delicious. But the scientists don't intend to stop at bread. Now the same team wants to brew beer using yeast from Eds as well. And since its microbes are wild and ancient, the taste of this beer promises to be, to put it mildly, unusual. I bake sourdough bread myself. I know this business and I love it very much. But eating bread made with yeast from the body of a person who died 5,000 years ago? No, thank you. I completely understand that it's safe. The scientists have checked everything 100 times, but still, I just can't wrap my head around it. So you die somewhere in the mountains, and thousands of years later, Your descendants will be baking bread and making beer from you? Savages with scratches in burials. The Sungir site on the outskirts of Vladimir in Russia. They stumbled upon it by accident in 1955 when they were digging a pit for a brick factory, and an excavator hit a mammoth tusk. And underneath it, they found a burial of people from the Ice Age, about 30,000 years old. The very ones who are depicted as savages in furs in textbooks. They were not well preserved. The bone in the ground looks intact, but as soon as you touch it, it crumbles into dust. So, extracting and preserving these skeletons was a huge effort in itself. They were buried in a way that savages would not be buried. The man was lying in clothes decorated with beads made from mammoth ivory, and there were several thousand of these beads. Each one was carved and drilled by hand. It took years of work to make a single outfit. A row of graves of 2 children were laid head to head, and with them, there was a whole arsenal. Animal figurines, rings with slits, and spears carved from solid mammoth ivory. One of them is almost 2.5 meters long. But the most terrifying thing was discovered recently, when the skeletons were re-examined with modern equipment. This man was murdered. A stone arrowhead was stuck in his neck, which severed an artery, and there was a finishing blow to the forehead with a stone from above as if he was kneeling. And it seems the children were also killed. One boy had a hole in his pelvic bone from a sharp weapon, and DNA also revealed something strange. They are not brother and sister, as was thought for half a century. They are 2 boys and not related at all. And one of them couldn't walk during his lifetime. So now think about it. 30,000 years ago, someone killed these children, and then they were buried more richly than any chief. They covered them with thousands of beads and precious spears. What kind of ritual did they have there? Who was sacrificed and for what? And why exactly these children? No one will ever say. The earth preserved the murder for us, but took the reason with it. A letter that no one can read. The Urals, a peat bog near Yekaterinburg, January 24, 1890. Gold miners pull pieces of darkened wood with strange carvings out of the peat. Later, they will put them together, and a figure several meters tall will appear, carved from wood, an idol with a head, on which there are several faces at once. Scientists will call it the Shigir idol, after the place where it was found. Most likely, it was an image of some deity or spirit that ancient people worshipped, their wooden god. No one realized how old the idol was for a long time. People believed it was only a few thousand years old. And then in 1997, they finally did a radiocarbon analysis. It turned out to be about 9,500 years old. The scientists couldn't believe it. It turned out that simple hunters carved a complex statue with symbols at a time when, by all accounts, people hadn't yet reached that level of artistry. But the story didn't end there. In 2014, German scientists studied the idol again, using more precise methods. They took samples from deep inside the wood where they hadn't reached before. The idol became even older. Now it is estimated to be between 11 and 12,000 years old. That's twice as old as the Egyptian pyramids, and older than Stonehenge. It turns out that when someone carved this figure, people didn't even know how to grow their own food yet, and survived only by hunting. And the fact that it survived to our time is a real miracle. It's all thanks to the peat. It doesn't let air through, and wood doesn't rot in it, but is preserved for thousands of years. Once, the idol was enormous, about 5 meters tall, 3 times taller than a person. But part of it was lost over time. And today, only what survived stands in the Yekaterinburg Museum, about 3.5 meters. But the main mystery isn't even its age. The entire figure is covered in symbols, lines, diamonds, human faces placed one above the other. These are clearly not random scratches. There's some kind of system to them. It's as if someone wanted to say something with them, but exactly what, we don't know. And most likely we'll never find out. So what we have before us is the oldest message from humanity, but we can't read it. 800 million years underground, Siberia, the village of Rzhavchik in the Kemerovo region, September 5, 1969. Deep underground, about 70 meters below the surface, miners are extracting coal, and suddenly they come across a marble sarcophagus. At first they were excited. They thought there were treasures hidden inside, but when they removed the lid, there was a pink, transparent liquid inside, and in it lay a young woman. She looked about 30 years old. She was tall, with long dark hair, wearing a white lace dress, but she didn't look dead at all. That's why she was called the Tisul Princess, a real sleeping beauty. And next to her head, right in the liquid, there was a small black box. It looked eerily similar to a modern phone. Then comes the part that made this story a legend. One of the miners couldn't resist, dipped his finger into the unknown liquid from the coffin that was millions of years old, and decided to taste it. Genius, what can I say? A week later, he went insane, and in the winter, he froze to death right at the door of his own house, never recognizing it. And just a couple of hours after the discovery, people in gray protective suits appeared in the village. I don't know how they learned about the discovery in such a remote place so fast, especially the sarcophagus. They loaded it into a helicopter and left in an unknown direction. Later, they returned and collected all newspapers with the article about the discovery from every house. The scientist who examined the body and dared to talk about it, and the newspaper editor, were reportedly punished. Everyone who saw the princess began dying one by one over the next few years. The strangest thing was what the scientist who examined the body said. According to him, this woman is over 800 million years old. That's not even the time of the dinosaurs. That's actually the period when there was hardly any life on Earth at all. No one ever explained how the body could lie there for so long without decaying, or what kind of liquid preserved it. And there was no one left to ask. The body was taken away, the newspapers were confiscated, and there were no witnesses left. There is absolutely no evidence for this story. No body, no sarcophagus, not a single proper photograph. So most likely, it's just a legend that over time gained more details and spread across the internet. Now just think about it. Our planet is 4.5 billion years old. In that time, dozens of civilizations could have appeared and disappeared. Some burned, some froze, and some were hit by a comet. And every time the few who survived had to start all over again with nothing. So why are we so sure that we're the first and only ones to have come this far? Or maybe civilizations that managed to leave our planet long before us are now watching us and see us as just ordinary savages. Write in the comments whether you agree with this or not, and like the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because a new video is coming soon.